Privyet moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I go over these daily events of what's going on in Ukraine. I was sick to my stomach when I looked at the day. 356, almost 365 days, almost a full year that we have been seeing this terrible war in Ukraine. And stick with me. I'm going to cover today's events, and I'm also going to focus on something particular. It was a couple of days ago, but here are today's events. Russians advancing near Bakhmut, what's going on there, the increased authoritarianism in Russia. NATO is meeting today and tomorrow. They know that they need to ramp up productions. Lessons learned from history. This is what I saw a few days ago that it just didn't really fit into what we're talking about, so I was like, let me set it aside, but I want to talk about it today. I think it's important. Ukraine-China relations, and then we'll conclude, as we normally do, with fun with Russian state media and what happened 1 year ago today. Okay, we're going to begin with the British Ministry of Defense. In the last 3 days, the Wagner Group forces have almost certainly made further small gains around northern outskirts of the contested towns of Bakhmut. And depends on who you read. The Russians are saying, we've completed Bakhmut almost every day. We almost have it. We almost have it. At some point, you got to say, are you actually getting it or not? But they are inching along, so they are moving that direction, but it's not anything completed yet. Organized Ukrainian defenses continue in the area. In the Crimea sector of Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces are making continuous counter efforts, although each local attack remains on too small a scale to achieve a breakthrough. So they're not actually deploying enough forces to overrun. Russia likely aims to reverse some of the gains Ukraine forces made in September and November. They desperately want to do that, and Russian forces are being given orders to advance in most sectors, but they have not massed sufficient offensive combat power in any one axis to achieve a decisive effect. So it's like they're saying, these 4 areas are really important. Go take your forces and go overrun these 4 areas. If they had simply concentrated, they could have overrun one of them and taken that fairly decisively. But they haven't, like they're being asked to do more than they're actually able to do. And I think that's a fair understanding of what's going on. This is Radio Free Europe. Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks in a dozen settlements in the country's east and northeast over the past day, inflicting significant losses. The losses in the last couple of weeks have just been staggering. Now, I'm not sure that the Ukrainian military statistics are something that I'm going to say, yes, those are it, but I know that they have amplified significantly over time. And like the British said in the Ministry of Defense update a day or two ago, the trend lines are certainly right, even if the actual numbers are not quite correct. But it's very bad if you're Russian. Speaking to the reporters in Brussels on February 13th, Jens Stoltenberg said that the Western military alliance sees no sign whatsoever that Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing for peace. I'm of like mind with that. I don't think that he has any inclination to do that. The map here was really interesting, and for a particular reason. So if we look at this map, what I want to show you particularly is that this area in this shaded, like this line shaded kind of color, this is what Russia originally held before February 24th, this and Crimea. And so now they have they're in all this all the way down from here to Kherson, and they used to hold what's in blue. So they've taken back a huge swath of the country since the invasion, but since the invasion, the Russians still have a lot more than what are holding a lot more than what they have held. And they never actually got to the full borders of either Donetsk or Luhansk. Okay, I said that the NATO members were meeting to talk about what's coming next. This is Euro News. West must ramp up ammunition production for Ukraine, says Jens Stoltenberg. He said, Stoltenberg is now urging allies to invest in production as well as to expand it. Now, somebody said something really interesting in the comments. I was talking about there's 40 trillion to 1.7 billion or 1.7 trillion Russian GDP. And somebody did the math, and that was good on you. I'm sorry, I forget who it was, but you can take a victory lap. And so they did the math and calculated. So it's 22 times the production. And then they added, but Russia is spending 20% on GDP. And then they said, but Russia is spending 20% of GDP on military spending, and the West is not. I mean, Germany's spending 1.6, and other Western countries are spending like 2% or less, and that kind of thing. And yeah, you get credit for that. That A+, good analysis. Now, there's somebody else who came along and said, yes, but Russia can only go but so much further, where the West can ramp up. It's a matter of will, but the West can go from 2% to 20% if they had to, and Russia can't go beyond all that much further. I mean, they really can't. So good on both of you for having those kind of thoughts in the comments. Now, Solenberg's aware of this, and he says that he's urging allies to invest in production as well as expand it. The war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of ammunition and depleting Allied stockpiles. The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production, he said. So they're aware of this and they're fixing to remedy it as quickly as possible. This puts our defense industries under strain. For example, the waiting time for larger caliber ammunition has increased from 12 to 28 months. Orders placed today will only be delivered 2.5 years later. So we need to ramp up our production and invest in our production capability. Now, why is that a problem? Why can't you just spend it and start doing it? Because if you read I can't remember what the name of the official analysis is, and if you remember, put it in the comments, but basically there's a U.S. strategy document that says, look, the U.S. is ready and they can handle one major fight at a time, and if they're in the back of their mind, they're wondering if China is going to try to take Taiwan, they have to keep their powder dry, and so they have to be very careful about how they handle what they're giving to Ukraine at the same time. Okay, now I'm not going to play this video, but I want you to see what Volodar it looks like from the sky, just from this one picture of the pockmarks on the ground. Now, the pockmarks are hitting on this road largely because this is kind of where tanks are going to mass, and if they go out here or they go around it or they miss, I mean, that's just remarkable. It's mind-blowing to see. Let's turn our attention to the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. The Wagner Group's continued dissemination of deliberately brutal extrajudicial execution videos and generally graphic content is normalizing an increasing level of brutality. Talked about the sledgehammer thing yesterday or the day before. A second person has been killed that way. That was one of the Wagner fighters, and they promised, they told him, we will kill you if you don't fulfill your obligations. And they made good on it, but it's just brutal. A Wagner Group affiliated Telegram channel posted a video on February 12th showing the brutal execution of a former Wagner fighter with a sledgehammer. The Wagner-affiliated Telegram channel accused Yushchenko of defecting to Ukraine and posting a video reportedly of him expressing pro-Ukrainian sentiments while in Ukrainian captivity. So once they got their hands on him, they killed him with the sledgehammer. Several prominent mill bloggers responded positively to the execution video. This is where they are, claiming that such vicious and inhumane killing is an appropriate way for Wagner to deal with betrayal in its ranks. So that's the mindset that you're up against. Russian authorities are increasingly undertaking measures to promote self-censorship in Russia under the guise of countering increased information threats. So when you couple the brutality here with the self-censoring in the media, you're seeing more of an authoritarian regime. I would say it's fascist. Now, you can quibble with me about, well, you're not technically using the term fascist, right? But generally, in spirit, this is what fascism looks like. Russian state media censor announced that the launch of Oculus, automatic search system that automates scanning text, images, and video footage to detect state-censored content, extremist themes, calls for mass illegal activity, suicide, pro-drug, and pro-LGBTQ content. Oculus can analyze 200,000 images per day, as opposed to, a human being can analyze an average of about 100 images or 100 videos a day. And so they're automating. It's kind of like what China's doing. China has this amazing facial recognition system where they can see where people are and monitor and track them. That's authoritarianism. Oculus, alongside of other recent Kremlin efforts to digitize Russian society while simultaneously expanding control of digital Russia, are likely efforts to scare Russians into further self-censorship, as if they're not already isolates or bystanders enough. And if you don't understand those phrases, go back and watch this video, because this video I talk about why the Russian population, they're just not going to overthrow Putin anytime soon. But this is just going to add to that self-censorship. The state agency may soon ban YouTube. So that's where they are in Russia, and they're becoming increasingly authoritarian as the war goes on. Let's keep going. Putin is using special train, secret railway network, investigative reports say. Okay, there is something and there's not something to see here. protecting the president of a major country is a kind of a normal thing. So you have bodyguards and you have extra protection, and like Biden has protection everywhere he goes. But when did this start happening? So investigative reports say President Vladimir Putin has been using a specially built armored train for his official travel, while a secret railway network has been built near his residences. Another railway station was built in 2015 near Moscow, some 400 meters from Putin's residence, and the train is armored, the report says, adding Putin started using it in the second half of 2021 as Russian forces were preparing to invade Ukraine. So the timing of that makes me wonder, like, was he expecting this to be a bigger problem? I don't know. It's just, I just found it interesting and I thought I would share it. Now, this is the most interesting thing that I've seen in the last few days, and it's not today's news. It's actually from the 10th. Today is the 14th, so happy Valentine's Day, folks. But it was from the 10th. So each day, President Zelensky reads my book on military history. I hope he heeds these warnings, says Lawrence Rees. Lawrence Rees is a legit historian. He writes a lot about World War II. I've read some of his stuff about Hitler. Ukraine's leader is avoiding the mistakes of the Second World War, while Putin shows every sign of repeating them. That's really interesting. So we get into this. I was flattered when The Economist reported a few weeks ago that Zelensky gets up early each morning and reads from my book, Hitler and Stalin, the Tyrants in the Second World War. So he's educating himself. That's a good thing. What surprised me when I started listening to the potential parallels was that consciously or unconsciously, Zelensky has already learned much of what history has to offer, where Putin has demonstrably not. Well, that's good. 3 broad areas of this history that are especially relevant to the conflict in Ukraine, and he goes into each one of them. The first of the warnings is straightforward. Leave strategy to your most talented generals. This is a warning Joseph Stalin did not heed, and Stalin got into all kinds of trouble, lost hundreds of thousands of men because he didn't do it, and then when he started listening to his generals, it all started to go the right direction. Now, he's not the only one that's had that kind of problem. Like, so if you think about Johnson calling airstrikes from the White House during Vietnam, bad idea. Leave it to your generals to do the generaling. And now Zelensky has done a really good job with this, Putin not so much. Zelensky has understood that his role, he can sing his highest notes being communicator-in-chief and asking for his partners for things and doing those functions. His media background has prepared him remarkably well for that. He recognizes he's not a general, though his presence at places like Bakhmut has great symbolic meaning. In the meantime, Putin, a year ago, was similarly overconfident when the Russians invaded Ukraine. Tens of thousands of his soldiers died and are still dying because of his military incompetence. He was actually like micromanaging what was going on in the East during much of the war. In contrast, from the very beginning of this conflict, Zelensky has left the military decisions to his generals. That is consistent with everything that I've read. Okay, warning number 2. The next warning is this. Overpromising in a war can have catastrophic consequences. So in September of 1942, Adolf Hitler made a speech in which he assured the German people that no one can take this away from us. What? Stalingrad. Well, apparently they did. And so that's a really big thing. Putin is in a similar position. He keeps reassuring the Russian population that the Ukrainians are about to be crushed. They're about to be crushed, right? Like, how many times have we heard that Bakhmut is about to fall, right? But does anyone now believe him? Zelensky's taken the opposite approach. If anything, he downplays Ukrainian success and says it's going to be hard, but I have every confidence in you. Okay? The final warning is simple. This is number 3. Make sure that you are clear just what constitutes victory. Hitler failed to do this. Now, Putin is in the same place. Putin is just as vague about what victory looks like. It is simply holding on to the territory that they seized, or maybe it's overthrowing the current Ukrainian regime. He's not clear, and the goalposts keep moving, and that becomes a problem. So who can tell? Zelensky is very clear about it. Zelensky's definition of victory is all Russians off our land. That's it. Now the question is, can he actually do that? Can it be achieved? Over time, I think it can be with the right weapons. They certainly have the will, but he's very clear about what constitutes victory. And the author concludes with this: perhaps Putin needs to read my book so that he can learn the lessons of history for himself. Although, since we all hope that he keeps performing incompetently, maybe it's best if he doesn't. So that, I think, is really important to understand. I give Zelensky very high marks in leadership, and I give Putin very low marks in leadership. And this is my subject of expertise, just watching what the leaders do and how they're acting and how they're performing and where they go, what they say, those kind of things. And Lawrence Reed is a legit historian. Okay, last article before we turn our attention to fun with Russian state media is this. I saw this and I thought it was interesting this morning. China-Ukraine relations, Kyiv's balancing act. So if you compare and contrast Ukraine's relationship with China before and after the invasion, what's changed? Well, the biggest contrast is the perception of China in Ukraine. So Ukrainians are not all that thrilled with China, but they increasingly understand that Beijing will not help Ukraine, and on some issues, China's on the side of Russia, providing it with economic, technological, and diplomatic support. But China's being really careful not to cross the line and get themselves sanctions, because they do not want that. They want to continue to trade with everyone. And so China continues to adhere to its so-called pro-Russian neutrality, and there are no significant signs of its change. So whatever they're doing very quietly. They can't be full-throated in their support of Russia. Kyiv simply does not have the tools to influence China. It's just, you have a quarter of the world's population in China, and then you have 40 million-ish, less than that actually, since there is, people have gone out of Ukraine. It's a very imbalanced kind of thing. So Kyiv can't really influence him, but the US and the EU, they can influence, and this diplomacy should be aimed at providing consistently articulating that China will suffer catastrophic losses if it supports Russia. And so China doesn't want any part of that. China, I think the leaders in China are shrewd enough to know if we play our cards right, we can prosper regardless of how the outcome comes out. And I think that's what they're doing. Okay, now it's time to turn our attention to some fun with Russian state media. First article, brave Ukrainians doing dirty work, ex-Pentagon chief says in a prank call. Okay, so this is like the call to John Bolton a couple weeks ago. These pranksters called the former Secretary of Defense. I don't know how they got his number or whatever, but his name is Mike Esper. He served Donald Trump's administration. He served the Pentagon chief in the administration of Donald Trump, spoke his mind on the phone call with Russian pranksters who go by the name of Vovan and Lexus, believing that he was talking to former Ukrainian President Poroshenko. Okay, so eggs on his face because he thought he was talking to Poroshenko and he wasn't actually talking to Poroshenko. But what did he actually say? He said this: brave Ukrainian people are doing the dirty work of what we would never wanted to do here in the United States, which is why we should continue to support you with everything that we can, whether it's munitions or arms or intelligence. Okay, it's like he didn't say, yeah, we can't wait to stab him in the back, or he didn't say like, well, we don't really want to be part of this, or he just said like, you're on the pointy end of the spear, we're supporting you with everything that we have because like you're doing it. So I don't even understand why this is an RT, because it's not like they had so they had a gotcha moment in the sense that they tricked him into, but they didn't trick him into saying something like counter to what everybody, the administration and everybody else is already saying. They're saying the same consistent message. Okay, let's look at RT a year ago today and see what was being said. This is February 14th, 2022. Ukrainian grandma with an AK-47 is shown off by the Western press by neo-Nazi fighters. Well, what's going on here? There's a notorious Ukrainian neo-Nazi group was reportedly behind a highly publicized civil defense training session preparing civilians for a potential Russian invasion, with Western media now accused of having covered the event uncritically as part of a worsening standoff with Russia. So there was a picture of this in other press as well. The 79-year-old told reporters that she wants to be prepared to defend her family, and with good reason, because things were about to get really bad in about 10 days 1 year ago today. And so they said, well, what's going on? It's either A or B. A, non-Russian speaking American reporter arrives in Kyiv and just happens to find Ukrainian babushka with an AK-47 and an outdoor drill on a 40-degree Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius cold winter day. Or B, there's a very well-organized information war going on. Take your pick. Well, the information war is an RT. So again, neo-Nazi fighters, well, these guys are going to prove themselves to be pretty tough. That's the Azov fighters that were training civilians ahead of time, preparing for what was coming down the pike. All right, let's look at some other news of what was going on 1 year ago today. The U.S., this is February 14th, 2022, 1 year ago. U.S. still holds out hope for a diplomatic solution in the Ukrainian crisis. Another headline, the Dow drops as the U.S. announces Kyiv embassy closure. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average is a massive chunk of the stock market, and you kind of watch what's going on with there, and current events are often telling you whether it's going, if it's going up or whether it's going down. It's sending signals about what the market thinks about current events. Here's another one. Kremlin spokesperson says Putin is, quote, willing to negotiate. Is he really? I think he's already made his mind up at this point. And then White House says the door for diplomacy with Russia remains open, but troop buildup is continuing. That's not a good sign. It's going to go south very shortly. Biden National Security Advisor is briefing the Senate leaders now, like they know it's about to come down. And last but not least, the Pentagon says Putin keeps adding to his menu of options with military buildup by land, sea, and air. It's all going wrong. Here's the last thing I'm going to show you. Department press briefing, February 14th, 2022. They say this: it's a distinct possibility, perhaps more real than ever, that Russia may decide to proceed with military action, with new Russian forces continuing to arrive at the Ukrainian border and Russian forces staged all around Ukraine. An invasion, as we have all said, could begin any time. Should Putin decide to order it, there would be widespread human suffering. Absolutely right. All the while, we are actively working to try to reach a diplomatic solution. Alas, as you know, they couldn't find that diplomatic solution because, again, it all depended on what Putin wanted to do. I remember when I was a kid, a friend's older brother had a black eye, and I asked him what happened. He said, well, he wanted to fight and I didn't, so we fought. That's the way it works. I mean, it's just that simple. Okay, if this was meaningful to you, if I added any value to your life, please give me a like, share, subscribe. If you want to buy me a cup of coffee, I'd appreciate that. If you want to give to United 24 or Samaritan's Purse, the links are down below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. See you tomorrow.